Turn, right? There's actually a report called from this National Center of Transgender Equality called At Every Turn that, really highlights from all the main issues around housing, higher ed, access to healthcare, access to higher education, employment, right? All of these things, like, it's not an accident. It is not just trans people that have created these conditions or because of the choices we have made. That actually all of it is intentional. And there is actually, and for a lot of the college students that are learning about systemic oppression and institutions and sort of the history, right, of colonization, the history of slavery, right, that actually the United States was not, born out of this, these high moral values of freedom and justice, but is actually rape and violence and torture and slavery, right? That's actually the history that we don't get to hear, right? So it's heavy stuff, right? And it sits in my heart, and in these spaces and when I'm speaking, so many times folks are like, wow, Isa, that's a lot, how are you taking care of yourself? How are you coping? How are you dealing with all this? And I think part of it is these opportunities to share, actually, because it can't just sit with me. It can't. So actually, all of you now have some part in this. Like, everyone has, because our freedom and our liberations, they're bound with each other. They're bound with each other. And so my liberation is bound to your liberation is bound to mine. Before I continue, I wanted to share one of the videos to kind of give some context to some of the stories that I'm sharing and some of the issues that I'm hinting at. And this is from an action as an example of actually the community, how trans women of color, Black trans women, Latina trans women, API trans women are actually taking the leadership and really just are at, kind of just fed up, right? We're just pissed off, right? And at this point, we're not waiting for people to get it together. We're not waiting for people to get it, or we're not waiting for people to take a Trans 101. We're not waiting for people to no, we're taking up space. And we're gonna come up on stage and we're gonna go on the streets and we're gonna go in front of City Hall and we're really gonna take up space and actually demand for conditions to change. So this is a rally that happened last year. It was an intense moment. People want to talk about the violence in our community, if it's this new thing, in the media, this uptick, this spree or whatever. It's actually, I've never in this work, I've never not been to a funeral. I've never not been to a rally for one of my sisters. I can't even remember, right? So to me, there's been no sort of there's been no uprise in the violence for trans women or for trans women of color in particular. This has actually been a part of what we're actually living every single day. So this is a video of a rally that took place. One of our sisters, Taja de Jesus, was brutally murdered in San Francisco. And it was a lot. I think you'll get some of that rage from me in particular in this video. Go ahead.
So what we're gonna do is we're getting ready to have a die-in.
Taja de Jesus.
And what that means is presente.
No es justo.
My name is Vanessa Rochelle.
We're gonna lay down for 3 minutes and 50 seconds.
I'm 24 years old.
Taja de Jesus.
No es justo.
Remember my face because the statistics will tell you that in the next decade, I will have died violently.
And that's the life expectancy of a transgender woman of color.
Taja de Jesus.
In representation of Taja de Jesus.
Today we're standing here because my friend and sister, Taja Gabriela de Jesus, was stabbed to death in a Bayview in San Francisco.
This is not the first time that we've gotten together like this.
Today we're standing here because the ignorance, the transphobia.
We've gotten together like this many, many times.
The lack of support continues in this country, in this city.
As a black woman and as a black transsexual woman, I know what it's like to wonder whether the man I date or see on BART or the bus will be my murderer.
I know that this is not going to be the last time that I'm going to be standing here yelling to my lungs are about to explode.
I believe that we're told we're given unalienable rights,
I'm immediately brought back to Ruby Orellana when we were in the mission.
which, if I'm correct,
I feel like I'm in a nightmare and in a constant loop.
includes the right to live.
So I'm gonna read out the names.
But honestly, I'm starting to believe that that right is not guaranteed.
Taja Gabriel de Jesus, who is 34. Jasmine Bosch Payne, 33.
Year after year, we read the list.
Ty Underwood, 24.
The list of girls who've been murdered by a man.
Lamia Beard, 30.
While at the same time, I'm wondering if my name will reach that list one year.
Goddess Edwards, 20. And last night there was another murder
So I'm not going to thank you for being here.
of a trans woman of color
I'm not going to thank you for holding up a sign.
by the name of Penny Proud.
For the last 10 years, we've been giving Israel $10 billion a year. And yet Israel is the most technologically developed country in the Middle East. I mean, they have a big booming economy, but it's subsidized by us, the U.S. taxpayers. Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu requested a 50% increase in the amount that the U.S. gives to buck it up from $3 billion a year to $4.5 billion a year. So keep watching the budgets of the United States and see if that goes through. It's one of the things that we're all very, very concerned about on continuing to support the state of Israel on whatever it does. And right now, in the West Bank, it's a very tense time. The Israeli Defense Forces continue to accost young kids that are throwing rocks at them, throw them in jail, beat them up, throw them in jail, and a very interesting, if not tragic, in my opinion, phenomenon.
Where trans women were laying in front of the steps of City Hall and saying, we're not going to wait. We are not going to wait. We can't wait for you all to figure out how to, in your budget process, create a line item around violence prevention strategies for trans women. When we are consistently rallying, when we are consistently being targeted, right?
Who are taking knives and are trying to stab and have stabbed some IDF and security people and some civilians. And of course, they are generally shot dead on the spot. But it is a worrisome phenomenon from my perspective. Somebody that's not living there. I can understand why people are outraged about it.
Actually, there was Black trans women, Latina trans women that really were at the forefront of that and that really pushed sort of like what the demands were, pushed what the issues were. So Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, right? Miss Major, these all figures were like what really pushed the conversation. Not just that they were leading, they were really pushing in terms of what
You don't read about the numbers of young kids that are beaten up and then thrown in prison for throwing rocks or for doing nothing, and the numbers of houses that are raided every single night, and the lives disrupted in people. So the issue of what we do and how we as activists or concerned people, how we in the United States respond to these things. Well, one of the ways is what's going on with the program called Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. Boycotting goods that are made in the West Bank or in the occupied territories, but then are labeled with Israeli labels that we are told these are products of Israel, when indeed they are being made illegally on illegally taken lands. And so the boycott divestment program has been actually quite effective. It has, and I guess the effectiveness is measured in the degree to which the Israeli government and the politicians rail against it. And that is the thing that they rail most about. When Prime Minister Netanyahu was in Washington, D.C. 2 years ago to speak at the American-Israeli Public Affairs Council, AIPAC, the American lobby group for the state of Israel, essentially. Netanyahu, in his evening speech, railed at BDS, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanction. He mentioned it as a national security threat to the state of Israel, like 15 times in his speech. I mean, we were all stunned. We were outside. We had demonstrations that were outside. We actually had infiltrated the place and had a couple of people that were able to stand up, hold banners like Free Palestine, Stop the Bombing of Gaza, and all that, you know, for the like 10 seconds before they were essentially body slammed down. I mean, that's a tough crowd. We've got some tough people too that are willing to take the hits when you go in. But we were stunned when we were hearing Netanyahu on the outside, because we had his talk, it was being broadcast, and we had a speaker thing, so we were listening to it. And we had commentaries that were going on too with our own speaker system. When he'd say something, we would have our version of it. Well, anyway, he kept talking about the strategic threat to the state of Israel. BDS. It was like, holy smoke, we didn't know we were so effective. And we are. We are very effective. You know, the European Union has now put a EU-wide ban on products that are mislabeled. When it's found that these products are actually made in the occupied settlements, they are taken out of the shelves of supermarkets or merchandise stores all over Europe. And Netanyahu is madder than can be about that, and has been railing at the European Union about it. Well, stuff like that, I mean, the Israeli lobby is having an effect here in the United States on that exact same thing. We now have 5 states that have acted state laws saying it is unlawful to boycott, divest, or have sanctions against products of Israel. State laws. Kentucky was the first one. It was like, when I heard Kentucky did it, was like, big deal. But just this last week, Florida enacted a law, and California, Illinois, and I can't remember the 4th one.
There's one today.
Pardon?
There's one today.
Oh, my.
I'll tell you in a second.
Yeah. So this is very interesting, because it definitely is going to be challenged in court. I mean, people are not going to sit back and just let this broad brush of you can't protest, you can't challenge things go unanswered. But it does show the power of the Israeli lobby in some states.
U.S. Israel, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide.
The road I see is fair and free, where people can travel wherever they please, and children can eat and have shoes on their feet, and not be afraid when they walk on the street. It's not like there has to be rainbows and bunnies, or streets full of people all dancing like dummies, but freedom to live, to learn, and to play, to just be yourself and think your own way. The road I see may sound crazy to you, but hopefully, someday, you'll see it too.
We do it island style. From the mountain to the ocean, from our windward to the leeward side.
Has to sign up. So let's see what the sign says here. It says, Israel, 65 years of slaughter and media lies.
U.S. Israel, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide. U.S. Israel, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide. Kerry, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide. John Kerry, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide.
Very small area in the Middle East, this area called Gaza, the Gaza Strip. The map of Israel and Palestine, it shows over here what the Palestine Mandate actually looked like, I guess before 1948, the separation by the United Nations, or the creation of the State of Israel, which gave 51% of the land to the new State of Israel, and 49% of the land was retained by the Palestinian population who had lived in the whole place, the whole time, along with some Jewish folks who had lived there forever too, but the vast majority of people that lived in this thing called Palestine Mandate were Arab, Muslim populations that then were displaced. And here's what it looked like after the partition. And then here's what it looked like in 1967. You can see the Palestine area, the area in green, is getting smaller and smaller. And then what it looks like right now, where it is totally divided like a Swiss cheese, that very little of the Palestinian areas are together anymore, purposely together through illegal settlements, apartheid walls, settlement or security walls, or I want to acknowledge in the back our wonderful graduate student who's working on a PhD dissertation on the art that goes on to the walls, the giant, massive walls. And please tell us your name again. Sarah, pardon me. And Sarah gave a presentation last Friday, a very interesting presentation about the walls and about art and how artists portray what's going on these massive walls. And so now you can see that less than 20% of what the Palestinians had before, less than 50% of what was mandated in 1947 is available to Palestinian populations because of the walls that have cut it up and the illegal settlements that the Israeli government sponsors for new people coming into the State of Israel to live in these areas that are kind of like Southern California suburbs. When you see what they are, It's quite amazing. And then when you see what the Palestinians, even the Palestinians that are Israeli citizens and where they live in the state of Israel, much less than going over to the West Bank side of it, much less than going down to this little tiny place now that you see over here, which is what's called the Gaza Strip. And that's where I'll spend most of my time today, talking about what's going on in the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip, this little tiny area, is 25 miles long and 5 miles wide. And it contains it's one of the most densely populated areas of the world. It contains 1.5 million people in this little tiny area. And as I mentioned, the reason that I the reason I became interested, really terribly interested in this, was because of the Israeli attack in 2008 and 2009. It killed so many people, wounded so many, left so many homeless. So I and some friends went to Gaza actually before the Israeli attack had ended. We left here before it ended. We got there just as it ended and were able to go into Gaza for only a brief period of time. 24 hours is all that the Egyptian authorities would let us go in. We had to go in from Cairo, from Egypt, to go into Gaza through the Rafah crossing, because of course the Israelis were not about to let us go in through the Eretz, the Israeli crossing. You know, Gaza, in this little tiny area, Gaza is walled off from everything. It's a blockade, it's a siege, it's a quarantine that's been going on now for over 10 years. And it's a brutal one. The Israeli government over the years has acknowledged that they wanted to put the people of Gaza on a diet, and they very systematically lowered the amount of calories that were put on trucks, of food put on trucks to come in to feed this population, because the majority of supplies come in through UN trucks. A huge portion of that population are considered refugees from the 1948 era, and are still on the rolls. Here it is, over 60 years later, the numbers of Palestinians who are considered United Nations designated refugees, not only just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and in Jordan and in Syria and in Lebanon. Millions of Palestinians are considered refugees because they were driven from their homes. And particularly in Gaza, because the Israelis purposely have put a wall around, a physical wall on two sides of it, on the northern border and the eastern border, that are directly on the Israeli border. And then the Egyptians had put a wall on the southern border, which butts up to Egypt. And then the western border is the Mediterranean Sea. And that sea is considered impenetrable area. The Israeli military has ships that are offshore, anywhere from 1 mile to 5 miles offshore, to prevent people from Gaza from leaving. They can't leave. It's really called an open-air prison. People cannot leave of their own accord. It's one of the very few places in the world where people cannot leave. Another one is North Korea. People can't leave without government permission, but it's their own government giving permission. In the case of Gaza, you can get the permission of your government, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to leave, because there are other governments that are going to determine whether or not you can actually leave. Well, I went to Gaza 6 times in 2009 to bring people, to show them the horrific destruction that had happened in 2009. It was horrible. Not everything was blown up, but huge population areas, living areas, were just blown to smithereens. 50,000 people were left homeless. 50,000. At the end of that year, well, and there was a great outrage around the world. A great outrage. How in the world could the Israelis just keep attacking? I mean, attacking with F-16s, American F-16s, with artillery that was being fired just lobbed across the border from whole tank units that were on the border with just across the Israeli border. How could they keep doing that? How could they send mortars over? How could they use their drones their assassin drones to execute people, to target and execute them. There was a great deal of outrage about that. And so a lot of groups were trying to go into Gaza to come back with photographs, to be able to come and tell people in their community what horrible things were going on. At the end of that year, we organized what was called the Gaza Freedom March. There were 1,300 people from 55 countries that met, came all the way to Cairo to be able to cross the border, to go into Gaza, to march with the Palestinians at that one-year commemoration of what had happened in December of 2008. In December of 2009, we were going to have 1,300 people marching with the Palestinians, except the Mubarak government in Egypt said, no, you can't. We said, we've been working with them for 6 months to try to get permission to go, and then at the last moment, after everyone was already in Cairo, they said, no, you can't go. We negotiated and finally got 2 busloads of people to go, and they were the ones that were Palestinians who had family, who had never seen them, were journalists, and said, we really have to go. Everybody else hung in solidarity, saying, if all of us can't go, then none of us can go, kind of with the exception of these people, that this is really their only chance. So 2009 happened. The Gaza Freedom March happened, 2009, and it was really a predecessor to what we saw 2 years later in Tahrir Square, when the Egyptians themselves started rising up and took over Tahrir Square. We had done that a year and a half before. And when Egyptians saw what we were doing, because at that time, Egyptians were forbidden to meet in groups greater than like 3 or 4, or they would be arrested. And when they saw all these internationals on Tahrir Square, where they really were forbidden to be, and meeting in groups and talking, we like to think that maybe we helped encourage a little bit of the strength that the people of Egypt showed in that Spring Awakening, and tragically which has been just demolished by more dictatorship in that country. Well, in 2010, we decided we would have what was called the first Gaza Freedom Flotilla to try to challenge the naval blockade of Gaza. And 6 ships left Greece, and one of them was called the Marvi Mamre. You probably remember that one. It was the one that was, well, all 6 ships were attacked by the Israeli Defense Forces by a flotilla of about 20 military ships, to include submarines, fast destroyers, and then Zodiac boats, and a helicopter fleet that flew over and started shooting at us, unarmed civilians, on those ships. On the Marvi Mamre that held 600 passengers. It was a big, big ship, a big passenger ship that came out of Turkey. There were 9 people that were executed. I mean, executed with guns to their heads, essentially. Firing was coming from the helicopters and targeting people on the top of the ship. They would be wounded, and then when the Israeli commandos came onto the ship, they came up to the passengers and shot them in the head. 50 people were wounded on the boat. I was on a smaller boat that was right next to the Marvi Mamre. Our boat was boarded, as was all of the ships, and people beaten up on those ships. The Israeli commandos were brutal, and we had no suspicion that that was going to be the reaction, that it would be the same type of violent reaction that the Israelis had been doing toward the Palestinians, both in the West Bank and in Gaza. But we thought that probably this idea that the international community, that we could probably push the envelope, particularly, unarmed civilians. The ships had all been inspected. The law enforcement people knew there were no weapons on board. Well, from that flotilla, the tragic execution of all of those people got a lot of international publicity. The next year, in 2011, we decided that we would have Gaza Flotilla number 2, and that time, 10 ships and 22 national campaigns raised funds to purchase 10 ships to then try to challenge that naval blockade again, because it was still in effect. In fact, it was worse, getting worse and worse. Both the land and the sea blockades were worse. We had a campaign here in the United States called the U.S. Vote to Gaza, and we raised funds. Many of you all contributed to raising of them, and bought a ship that we named the Audacity of Hope. The Audacity of Hope. That was, remember that was President Obama's book's name, and we thought, well, we'll just name it that because he had not spoken out on this. Well, actually, he did in June of 2009. He gave a very strong speech about the need to work on these issues of Palestine and Israel, and said some, I thought, very encouraging things, but unfortunately, they haven't been followed through on. Carol Murray was one of our passengers from right here in Honolulu on our U.S. boat to Gaza. We had 40 passengers and about 8 crew. We were blocked from leaving.
Our social upbringing under colonialism, right? So I think it's critically important that people do show up, as Tita Hina expressed earlier. And so maybe I should talk a little bit about my story, how I fit in. I'm also I'm a product of the prison industrial complex as well as the military industrial.
Around the world just to stay in the port. So our little Audacity of Hope challenged the Greek blockade. And we challenged it for 3 miles until we were met by Greek commandos who had come after us to bring us back to port. And for an hour and a half to 2 hours, we had a confrontation with the commandos. We were not moving, and they were telling us we had to move. It gave us enough time that every passenger on our boat got the bullhorn and told the commandos why we needed to go to Gaza, to be there in solidarity with the people of Gaza. Well, eventually, when the commandos started bringing out their weapons, it was like, okay, this is about it. Because we were not intending to hurt anyone nor be hurt either. So we went back into port. Our captain was arrested, and I will say, just 2 months ago, 4 years later, our captain, who had been charged with reckless endangerment of the lives of the passengers of the Audacity of Hope and taking an unsafe vessel out from the dock, he had been arrested, put in jail for 3 days, and then this lawsuit brought against him by the Greek government. Finally, after 2 sessions in the court, the Greek lawyers that we had hired to represent him, because he, of course, was not about to go back to Greece until this got settled. Finally, the court acknowledged that he did not endanger anybody's life, and he was found not guilty of all those charges. Well, last year, there were several other boats that attempted to break the Israeli blockade of Gaza in both 2012 and 2013. Individual boats went from Sweden, from Italy. They were all stopped by the Israeli military. People on board those boats were tasered, were beaten up, and everyone that's a part of these flotillas that are finally stopped by the Israelis are kidnapped from the high seas and international waters and taken to Israel against their will, kidnapped, and then put into Israeli prison for a period of 3 to 8 days, and then ultimately deported. And the deportation is for 10 years. 10 years, and that essentially means you can't go back to Israel, and therefore you really cannot go back into the West Bank. There's no real way to get through to the West Bank, because whether you go through Jordan or whether you go through the Ben Gurion airport, you've still got to go through Israeli security and immigration, and they have your names on the list. And unfortunately, because of the turmoil in Egypt, the successive governments that have been in there have been very hesitant about letting the international community come into Gaza. It is very, very difficult to go to Gaza now, and it has been, particularly because both in 2012, there was another Israeli attack, a 5-day attack on Gaza, that killed 172 people and wounded 500. And then the horrific attack that happened a year and a half ago in the summer of 2014, a 51-day attack that killed 2,500 people in Gaza, 300 children, 279 mothers, women, a lot of men that were civilians, some men that were militants. There were 8 Israelis that were killed, 5 of them by friendly fire. by their own, firing from their own military. But the horrific, we thought that what had happened in 2008 and 2009 was bad, but what happened in 2014 was horrific, By all accounts, the level of munitions that were used, the numbers of attacks increased by 500%. 500%. And for the first time, there were actually international journalists that were in Gaza when that was happening. And I don't know if you all remember, but seeing some reporters from, for God's sake, CNN actually in Gaza reporting and ducking as Israeli missiles and bombs were flying by. I don't know if you all remember seeing that, but I was astounded because generally nobody reports from inside Gaza other than like Al Jazeera. But none of the major U.S. networks did. And I think their reporters were very chastened by what they saw, the level of brutality. Now I'm just going to pass around some of the books that have photos that just flip through them just to see the level of damage that was done. And you know, that there were, this time, 1/3 of the population of Gaza, over 600,000 people were displaced from their homes. 600,000. They were going to try to escape the intensity of the bombing by going into like UN school compounds, to hospitals, things that they hoped had been identified as places where the bombing would not happen. Well, that was not true. The Israelis had no compulsion at all about hitting places where everybody was hoping and praying that they would at least have some places for sanctuary. There's another one. And I'll just hold up this book right here because it's written by a Norwegian surgeon by the name of Mads Gilbert, who has been for the last 15 or 20 years, he's been spending part of every single year going into Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City and being one of the internationals that are helping the very valiant surgeons and doctors, Palestinian surgeons and doctors who live in Gaza, who are there day in and day out and are dealing with all of the horrific things that have been happening, trying to keep populations alive essentially without any medical supplies. And that's what happened in this 51-day attack. They ran out of everything. There were so many people that had been wounded in the attack, so many people that had been killed, including ambulance drivers. The ambulance crews were targeted by the IDF, and many ambulances were blown up by missiles, by drone missiles. So Dr. Gilbert is the one that has written probably the most, at least in English, about the attacks in Gaza. And having seen them, he actually was in Gaza in 2008 and 2009. It just happened that his rotation of coming in for a period of time happened when the Israeli attack occurred, and the same thing in 2014. So he has written about the comparison of the intensity of the Israeli attack, that it was a horrific, 500 times more powerful. And he goes through with the numbers of artillery shells that now the IDF has acknowledged that they fired into Gaza, the number of tank shells, the number of aerial weapons that were used. I mean, it is called a laboratory. Gaza is a laboratory. It's a laboratory for the testing of military equipment. Not only Israeli military equipment, you know, Israel is one of the biggest weapons manufacturers, but it also uses U.S. weaponry. We have special deals that we work with the Israelis. The U.S. has a munitions warehouse in Israel, and that warehouse was depleted of everything. They had used everything on Gaza. The United States continues to give sweetheart deals to the State of Israel on virtually anything it wants. When President Netanyahu, or Prime Minister Netanyahu, was in Washington last year, you know, he was invited by the Republican House of Representatives to come and speak to the U.S. Congress. It was quite a political deal because normally a head of state is invited by the equivalent head of state, but no, because of the political things, the Republicans wanted to get Netanyahu in there to rail at President Obama about several things, to include the administration's agreement, along with 5 other countries, with Iran to end their nuclear program. And Israel did not like that, and many of the Republicans didn't, so they invited him in. They came back a month and a half later, much less under the radar, but this was with a request to increase the amount of money that the U.S. gives Israel. For the last 10 years, we've been giving Israel $10 billion a year. And yet Israel is the most technologically developed country in the Middle East. I mean, they have a big booming economy, but it's subsidized by us, the U.S. taxpayers. Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu requested a 50% increase in the amount that the U.S. gives to buck it up from $3 billion a year to $4.5 billion a year. So keep watching the budgets of the United States to see if that goes through. It's one of the things that we're all very, very concerned about on continuing to support the state of Israel on whatever it does. And right now, in the West Bank, it's a very tense time. The Israeli Defense Forces continue to accost young kids that are throwing rocks at them, throw them in jail, beat them up, throw them in jail, and a very interesting, if not tragic, in my opinion, phenomena where Palestinians, particularly young Palestinians, men and women, are responding not in a nonviolent nature, which has been kind of what has been happening over the last 10 years since the Second Intifada. Things have been kind of trying to do nonviolent resistance to what the Israelis were doing to the Palestinians. But over the past 6 months, I'm sure you've read about young men and women who are taking knives and are trying to stab and have stabbed some IDF and security people and some civilians. And of course, they are generally shot dead on the spot. But it is a worrisome phenomenon from my perspective, somebody that's not living there. I can understand why people are outraged about what's happening to them and the oppression that the IDF is putting on them. But the reaction that will come to them, and then the international reaction of, oh gosh, here, all this violence is going on, recognizing only the violence of individuals, these few individuals that are doing it, versus the state-sponsored violence that the state of Israel is doing. But it is one of the things that you'll read most about that. You don't read about the numbers of young kids that are beaten up and then thrown in prison for throwing rocks or for doing nothing, and the numbers of houses that are raided every single night, and the lives disrupted in people. So the issue of what we do and how we as activists or concerned people, how we in the United States respond to these things. Well, one of the ways is what's going on with the program called Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. Boycotting goods that are made in the West Bank or in the occupied territories, but then are labeled with Israeli labels that we are told these are products of Israel, when indeed they are being made illegally on illegally taken lands. And so the Boycott Divestment program has been actually quite effective. It has, I guess the effectiveness is measured in the degree to which the Israeli government and the politicians rail against it. And that is the thing that they rail most about. When Prime Minister Netanyahu was in Washington, D.C. 2 years ago to speak at the American-Israeli Public Affairs Council, AIPAC, the American lobby group for the state of Israel, essentially. Netanyahu in his evening speech railed at BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanction. He mentioned it as a national security threat to the state of Israel, like 15 times in his speech. I mean, we were all stunned. We were outside. We had demonstrations that were outside. We actually had infiltrated the place and had a couple of people that were able to stand up, hold banners like Free Palestine, Stop the Bombing of Gaza, and all that, you know, for the like 10 seconds before they were essentially body slammed down. I mean, that's a tough crowd. We've got some tough people too that are willing to take the hits when you go in. But we were stunned when we were hearing Netanyahu on the outside, because we had his talk that was being broadcast, and we had a speaker thing, so we were listening to it. And we had commentaries that were going on too with our own speaker system. When he'd say something, we would have our version of it. Well, anyway, he kept talking about the strategic threat to the state of Israel. BDS. It was like, holy smoke, we didn't know we were so effective. And we are. We are very effective. You know, the European Union has now put a EU-wide ban on products that are mislabeled. When it's found that these products are actually made in the occupied settlements, they are taken out of the shelves of supermarkets or merchandise stores all over Europe. And Netanyahu is madder than can be about that, and has been railing at the European Union about it. Well, it's stuff like that. I mean, the Israeli lobby is having an effect here in the United States on that exact same thing. We now have 5 states that have acted state laws saying it is unlawful to boycott, divest, or have sanctions against products of Israel. State laws. Kentucky was the first one. It was like, when I heard Kentucky did it, was like, big deal. But just this last week, Florida enacted a law, and California, Illinois, and I can't remember the fourth one.
There's one today.
Pardon?
There's one today.
Oh my. Yeah. So this is very interesting, because it definitely is going to be challenged in court. I mean, people are not going to sit back and just let this broad brush of you can't protest, you can't challenge things, go unanswered. But it does show the power of the Israeli lobby in some states. One of the interesting boycott and divestment actions is on the academic and cultural boycott, where we are asking artists not to go to Israel as long as there is the occupation of the West Bank and the quarantine of Gaza. And we are at
Indiana.
Okay.
Yeah, for universities or anybody that engages in boycott or divestment.
So it's Kentucky, Indiana, Florida,
California. And I think Illinois did it before.
But these are not holding up in court.
No, but it just shows the challenges that we have and that we have to respond to. George?
I was just going to say, the way they try to do that is by depriving anybody or any institution that adopts a boycott or divestment stance, they then become deprived of state funds, state benefits. So it's not made illegal per se, but it's saying that we're going to sanction you if you do this. And so that's the way they're trying to do it. But I think even that probably not hold up at all.
Well, and let's ask about here now. Is there an issue that's going on at the University of Hawaii with that?
With our department.
Oh, okay. Maybe we ask about this.
Do you want now? Or
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay.
And you all know Professor Ibrahim Ayudi?
So I'm with ethnic studies, and so our department was the only department in the entire...
Why don't you stand up so that they
the only department in the entire United States that went for the academic boycott of Israel. And then we had, when was it, like maybe a month ago or something, one professor from Harvard asking our chair, Titan Gunn, as to why is this the case and what does it mean for Israeli students and Hillel, student association or whatever. And Tai answered him, and then he said, that's not sufficient. So he wanted to ask more. So Tai sent him a video of a program I hosted on the sanctions and all of that. And I think you were, it's the same video that when you were a guest on the show. And he came back, that guy, his name is Dan Schoen from Harvard, saying, you didn't, obviously you didn't answer my questions, what have you. So what he did, Schoen, was write a letter to the chancellor, interim chancellor of the U.S. Renova, and also to our dean, Denise Cohn. So she sent an email to Tai asking, what does that mean for Israeli students? Are we not going to be welcoming Israeli students or Jewish students here, and blah, 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 etc. So I told everybody, let's go on the offensive. And so we're going to try, and by the way, I sent it to everybody, including the chancellor and the dean, because I didn't know that it was they still were with it, on the thing. So, but then I told Tai, well, you know what? It's good for them to know, and that we're gonna go on the offensive. And I said, unite all who can be united in the defense and support of humanitarian law and international law. And then said, okay, we're not going to tell him anymore than that. And later, next time, I'll pay more attention as to who's being on the list served.
It's freezing.
I think so. So maybe not. Maybe only like 2-3 people.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah. No. He didn't send your response to them, no.
I responded to you.
You responded to me, okay. So anyway, so that's the situation now. So I said the first thing in terms of the offensive is to publicize it among our supporters, supporters of the Palestinians, that is, and supporters of ethnic studies on campus, maybe beyond campus, and also to start the offensive with a forum on that particular issue, and then plan out, an all-out offensive to really either educate the administrators or attack them, basically. That's it. So that's what's happening.
George? I'm just wondering, I'm not sure how clear some of it is in everybody's head just what is being boycotted. I mean, there's both the boycott of products, institutions, etc., in the so-called occupied territories, and then there is boycott and divest from Israel as a whole. So these are two different levels. But I think it's important for people to understand that it's not targeted at individuals. That is targeted at representatives of Israeli institutions. In other words, if somebody, an individual, let's say an academic scholar, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, were to try to come as a representative of an Israeli academic institution or Israeli whatever, then they are subject to the boycott, depending on what level the boycott is at. But if that does not prevent them from being invited as an individual. So correct me if I'm wrong about that, because I think these distinctions are important, especially when people start saying, oh, this is violating free speech and blah, 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 blah.
Well, in fact, the Harvard professor's complaint was about the ASA resolution in particular, which actually isn't quite in accordance with PACB guidelines. It's a little more restrictive. to really, I mean, it's a little more limited than the call in the academic boycott, to really be careful about not targeting individuals and keeping it at the institutional level. And there are some tricky areas. For example, if someone working at an Israeli university is going up for tenure, you are actually not supposed to write a tenure letter for them. And so there are times that it gets tricky. And there are guidelines kind of saying it's case by case, and that you actually, you need to wrestle with those things. But it's true that it's meant to target, and does for the most part stay very focused on institutions. And actually, the MLA boycott site has a new myths and facts handout that addresses a number of those, I think, pretty well. If you go to MLA Boycott 2017, there's a PDF there that addresses those issues.
That's the one you sent us.
Yeah.
Cindy has been helpful with our response to the dean as well by providing those kinds of myths and facts and other things. I didn't mention that was ASA and so on, but one of the things we did, like Ty talked about with advice from Cindy, was that it wasn't only ASA, but actually AAAS, Association for Asian American Studies, were the first ones to do that, to boycott, academic boycott. And this AAAS is the most important thing for ethnic studies as an association, for professional purposes and stuff like that. And then you have the ASA, and you have Anthropological Association. They passed it, but they gonna put it before the membership. And another one, I forget which one. Critical ethnic studies.
Literature,
right.
humanities,
Yeah.
peace and justice. There's like 9 or 10.
Yeah, but there's a couple who will put them before
the Women's Studies Association
and the Anthropology.
haven't passed yet.
But the others have all passed. So we kind of educated, tried to educate the dean and the chancellor. So we'll see where it goes. But we're going to go on the offensive because that's the only way we can do it. Enough is enough.
And the whole point being, we want to put pressure on institutions so that they can influence their own government to stop these oppressive things that are going on from the Israeli government toward the Palestinians. That's the only purpose of it, just like the boycott of the boycott of apartheid South Africa in the 1980s. It's the same principle of it. And there have been major institutions in the United States that have withdrawn funds from Israeli institutions, and several churches like the Methodist Church now, the Presbyterian, the United Church of Christ. It's really quite remarkable what what organizations here in the U.S. and around the world are doing, and boycotting specific Israeli industries too. The Veolia light industries, trains that are made, state-sponsored trains, light rails. So there is a lot of pressure now on the state of Israel, and that economic pressure is what we hope will force the state of Israel to change its policies. I want to mention two other things and then just open it up for further discussion. One, we do have some lawsuits that we filed against the state of Israel and officials of the state of Israel. The first one happened in Turkey in 2011, where in Turkish court, the passengers on the 2010 Gaza flotilla have sued 4 Israeli military officials for their planning and execution of the execution of 9 people on that flotilla. And there is a case that may be filed in the International Criminal Court. It's under advisement right now whether or not it will actually be filed for war crimes on the attacks at high sea, in high seas, of civilian unarmed vessels. 2 cases were filed here in the United States. The first time we've been able to get any pro bono legal help on this. And it doesn't come from the United States. It actually came from England. An English law firm took the cases and found some corresponding attorney that would file the case here in the U.S. But the first one was filed in November on behalf of the family of Furqan Doan, an American citizen, 19 years old, born in the United States of Turkish parents who were here on a fellowship. He was assassinated by the Israelis on the Mavi Marmara, and his family has filed suit in the Central District Court, U.S. District Court in California. That happened in November. And then just in January, 2 weeks ago, I was one of the plaintiffs in a case that was filed in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. District Court for the passengers on the U.S. flagged ship called the Challenger 1, where I was. And we are, it's interesting the way the lawyers say that you have to handle these things, that we're not putting Israel on trial for what it's doing to the Palestinians. We're putting them on trial for what they did to the passengers on that boat. And they have told us as defendant or as plaintiffs, it doesn't help our case at all for you all to talk about the reason that you were going on this trip. But what we are going after the state of Israel is that their actions toward this ship. So all of us would want, but that's not the way we want it. We want to put Israel on trial for what they're doing to the Palestinians. But in this whole thing called lawfare, using the law to make life difficult for people and governments, has been done to us in Greece. Now we're trying to do that to the Israelis. So we have those two court cases here in the United States that have just been filed. And then I will mention the latest project that we have is another boat project. And I'll pass around one more book. This is Freedom Sailors, a book written by Greta Berlin, and she was here just a couple of weeks ago and spoke at Revolution Books. But this is a history of the very first boats that were sent to try to break the naval blockade, and they were sent in 2008. And actually, 4 of them actually got into Gaza and brought Palestinians out. They actually did break the blockade, and then at the end of 2008, the Israelis started ramming all of these little boats and stopping it. And that's what triggered the next thing, which was the 2010 flotilla. Well, now we've had probably 15 boats that have tried to break the naval blockade. Most of those boats are in an armada that is in Haifa Harbor now. The Israelis have all those boats. But we're going to try one more time. And this time we're going to send a women's boat to Gaza to break the blockade. A women's boat. You know, the whole point of all this is trying to get publicity for the fact that people are going to try to break the Israeli blockade of Gaza, try to keep a focus on Gaza, and using this vehicle of ships to do it. And so we're kind of running out of ideas. So finally we said, well, why don't we send a women's boat? And we have a women's crew, the women passengers from all over the world. We have 8 national groups that are a part of this at the moment, and it'll be growing. It depends on how much money we raise as to how many boats we'll have. We'll definitely have 1, and we hope we have 2, and it would be thrilling to have 3. But we're going for 1 right now. And guess what? We need your help. So I'm going to give you a little flyer about the Gaza flotilla, the women's boat to Gaza, and I would like to pass around another piece of paper that if you would like to be on our email list so that we can keep you up to date about what we're doing, please put your name and email address on this, and we'll put you on our master list so that you'll get all of our
It checks out to women's boat to Gaza.
You can do that, or you can actually make it out to Nonviolence International. They're our fiscal sponsor. And then either if you want to send it, I can give you their address, or if you want to give the check to me, made out to Nonviolence, I'll mail it for you to get it to them. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I want to do this. First of all, I'm freezing in here.
Yes. Welcome to the University of Hawaii.
Even more than that, this is very upsetting to me. I have many 45-year, 50-year plus Jewish friends. None of them care about this or want to do anything about it. And this is just horrific. And so I'm going to contribute, but I really don't want to hear anymore. It's just too much for me.
Yeah.
It's just way too upsetting.
Well, and I want to thank Blaze because I talked to him several days ago, and he was saying how that he's just kind of stopped listening to stuff because everything is upsetting. And so I thank you so much for at least coming to be with us and knowing, you know, all of this room of people are so concerned about the same issues that you are. But at a certain point, I mean, we all kind of go, oh my gosh, I can't. I mean, it's.
Could you at least answer this one question?
Sure.
Bernie, Hillary, Trump, what is their position on Israel?
Well, they all support the state of Israel. We have not one candidate, presidential candidate, with the exception of Rand Paul, who at least will make some distinctions. But I'm sorry? Pardon me. That is for sure. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, has the best politics on everything, to include the issue of Israel-Palestine, support for Palestinians, and Jill Stein is the one presidential candidate that we have.
Could I want to be, I have to go.
Okay.
Can I say one thing to you before you go?
Yes. What?
About Jewish people. I actually think this is a colonial situation. It's one of occupation and settler colonialism, and I actually think it's really important to separate this as a Jewish, you know, as a Jewish thing. I mean, it's, you know, there's a Jew.
I have an affinity for Jews my whole life. I've had a lot of Jewish close friends, and I was always under the impression that they were all liberal. Far from it. As years evolved, I noticed that a couple of them, not even. So I'm not friends with them anymore. And the rest of them, who I still am in touch with, we have love and affection, they don't want to know about it. It's like nobody's
Well,
active.
I actually just, you know, I really have to object to that kind of criminalization. Like, I'm looking at George Koudas here, who has done, you know, concerted for so many years, as, you know.
This is why it's upsetting to me, because these are my dear friends.
Okay, and
And as I've mentioned to Blaze, that there are so many people of the Jewish faith, of the Jewish tradition, who are extraordinarily upset about all of this. And some very, very good groups that have formed and come together to challenge this as Jewish people challenging the state of Israel. You know, Jews say no, Jewish voices is peace.
yeah, those are very strongly anti-Zionist Jewish organizations.
Yeah, so there are a lot of people.
I donate to them.
Yeah, so, you know, there are a lot of people who maybe in the past have supported the state of Israel, but have seen what the state of Israel is doing and are very, very, very upset about it. And the whole education of our friends, you know, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, like my right-wing Republican sister in Texas. I mean, I have a very difficult time with her on these issues, and I think that we just, for all of us, we have to kind of keep after it. And you know, the facts are there, the statistics are there, and some people will refuse to look at them, but just know that you've got a whole group of friends here, that we are all working hard.
I'd like to be able to get in touch with you. We live in the same building, so could I do that?
Yeah.
By the way, would I speak to you, get your number or something?
Yeah.
So I would like to. And I apologize to everybody for this. But you have no idea. I wasn't going to come because I've stopped watching the news 2 years ago because and I used to watch C-SPAN 1, 2, and 3, Al Jazeera, you know, BBC. I was into it, and it's just too upsetting. I reached a point where I said, this is a negative energy addiction. And it's harming me. And all news. And it's harming me. So I don't do it. And I came to this because
don't forget this.
Okay, so how do I get in touch with you?
Okay,
And again, I apologize to everybody, but I almost didn't come.
I was wondering about the military. Like, do you think that people in the military become sort of dehumanized or desensitized to war issues, and how to help to discourage people from joining the military or help them to quit the military? Or, like, I was just wondering, it seems like since I lived in Hawaii, it seems like everybody I know is connected to the military, and this is new for me because I feel in Seattle, everybody's anti-military, and I'm just curious about the issues of being in the military. Does it seem like for you to become like a Palestine solidarity activist, it seems like such an about face compared to what the military is all about? And I'm wondering if also when you go to Israel, if the Israeli military is scared of you, like maybe they don't consider you a civilian as you're formerly in the military.
Well, I was one of the very few people on the flotilla that had had military experience. Most everybody else on all the flotillas are civilians, and most of them were, hands up, arm's distance from their own national militaries. But let me just mention on the issue of the Israeli military, very interesting there, that as in with the U.S. military, we have resistors, conscientious objectors, people that resist. The Israeli army has the same thing, or the IDF. In fact, 2 young women, 19-year-old women, went to prison yesterday. And they'll be in prison from anywhere from 6 months to 19 months because all women and men are inducted into the IDF. And there's a group called Breaking the Silence of people who are refusing to go into the IDF because they refuse to implement the occupation policies of the Israeli government. So I think that's the most important part for this conversation, that there are ways to resist. I didn't. I joined because I wanted to get the hell out of Arkansas. It's the only reason I joined the Army, but then I stayed in for a long time, but I'm trying to make up for it. Other questions or comments? Oh, and this is a military town. Boy, you have jumped right into one of the most militarized islands in the whole world, right here on Oahu. So you will meet a lot of people, and a lot of people who are in the military or work for the military, but a lot of other people who are saying way too much of Oahu and Hawaii have been militarized, and it's time the U.S. military to give back some of the lands that it has right now and reduce its presence. That is not the most popular view in town, but it is a view that is held by a great number of people, to include myself. And so if you want to work on issues like that, we can put you in touch with the Hawaii Peace and Justice Center, which is located up in Quaker House. And there are great groups that are around that can help you learn more about what's going on in Hawaii. Let me just ask you, what is the oldest military base that the United States has?
Was it St. Augustine, Florida?
Pardon?
St. Augustine.
Well, that's the oldest town, I think, that was here. But the oldest U.S. military base, say, outside the United States. Well, currently, officially, it is Guantanamo, Cuba. 112 years the United States has had that. But when you really look at it, a sovereign nation that the U.S. came in and took its area and still has it would be where? Right here. Yeah, Pearl Harbor. The U.S. military has had that before annexation in 1998, and then statehood in 1959. 1898. Okay. All right, next question or comment. Yes.
What are your long-term goals? Because you talk about putting pressure on Israel, but putting pressure on Israel to have them do what?
Well, one of them is for Gaza is to stop the blockade of Gaza. And the Israeli response was, well, we can't do that because, we're getting rockets that are fired at us from militant groups that are in Gaza. Well, but the reason those rockets are coming is because of the oppression and the stuff that's happening with the Israelis to the people in Gaza. So one of them is stopping the hostilities, stopping and letting the people of Gaza be able to exit the country, to go get the scholarships for the young kids, or go visit family, go get medical treatment, to allow water to come into Gaza, electricity to come in Gaza, to repair electrical plants, sewage plants that have been destroyed by war. And on the West Bank, to stop the stealing, the theft of illegal lands there. I mean, how about give us some more positions? I mean, there's just a whole raft of things that we would like to have stopped.
There's a good kind of distillation, I think, for if you go to the EDS website to dismantle the wall and end the occupation, to grant the right of return that's under international law, and then to give equality to those inside of Israel. Because right now there are over 50 laws that discriminate on their face against non-Jewish Israelis.
And there's just a whole raft of things. Essentially, it's that the state of Israel has to really redo a lot of the things that it is doing right now. It would be a real comprehensive change in its methodology of treatment of people in Israel and the West Bank and Gaza. And that's a tough one because they come way down a hole that is going to be real hard to get out of.
Just, I mean, the whole state of Israel is built on Palestinian land. Most of the Palestinians were pushed out in 1948, so.
Yeah. There's a whole legacy there that is not.
I mean, I just wondering because just that, it seems like it can't be a complete, because you can't ever make it completely right because you don't think Israel is going to agree to go away.
Well, even if it would go back to internationally recognized borders, that's one stage of it. But the right of return is certainly one of the elements of many of the Palestinians, that they should be able to return. Anybody else want to? Please.
You mentioned that the passengers and organizers kind of, let's say, anticipated that the Israeli army will have a violent response.
No, we did not anticipate.
Oh, you did?
We did not.
Oh,
no.
I heard wrong.
We thought that probably there'd be a standoff. And in fact, we had plenty of water and food on board, that we were ready to stay out there for about 2 weeks. And we were shocked with the violent response of the IDF.
So, can you tell us just a little bit about those moments, and even after, how you started thinking of how does the state of Israel view the flotilla? It seems like this is more like their anti-terrorism tactics. I mean, the way they do, the way they open fire and all these things. So it's a kind of a bizarre situation where kind of a humanitarian mission is treated like kind of a terrorist attack of sorts. And I was wondering if there are any legal aspects that they evoked, and how you guys treated it, and how you are thinking of dealing with this real threat of violence from the state in future missions.
Sure, yeah. Well, from 2010 onward, I mean, and even before the 2010 mission, we had all of the boats inspected by the national customs people of whatever port they left from, whether it was Greece or from Turkey or from Italy. One boat left from Italy. And so and the Israelis, I mean, they've got a intelligence agency that's everywhere. Mossad knew exactly where we were leaving from. I'm sure they had agents that had been on board. They looked around. They knew there was nothing there. Every one of the boats that have been a part of this flotilla has been inspected by national people, and the Israeli government knows that we are not carrying weapons, and that we are. The purpose is to challenge that blockade, get publicity for this. We will not be changing our tactics in terms of, we won't be carrying weapons. We'll be carrying a modest amount of supplies, medical supplies and things like that, because the boats generally are not big enough to carry anything meaningful quantity-wise. But we intend to keep doing this to just force the Israelis' hand in a way. to force their response, an illegal response to an unarmed vessel on the high seas, international waters. They're already breaking laws by accosting us there, kidnapping us, and dragging us into an Israeli port against our will, and then putting us in prison, and then deporting us, saying that we have entered Israel illegally. That's the charge we have. Entering Israel illegally. So all of these things are things that we can write articles about, we can talk to the communities about, and try to get more solidarity with Palestinians on it.
Well, a couple of things related to each other. One is that the U.S. did not protest the treatment of American citizens, by the Israelis in this thing. That's one thing. The other thing is that the U.S. did not go there, like for instance, protest not only like the treatment of Americans, but humanitarian law that is being violated day in, day out in Gaza, for instance. So it's, that's why, in the Arab world, there are people who love the U.S. and everything that does, but these are far and few between. And this is why, these kinds of things, is why America, the system itself and everything is hated in the Arab world. It's just like hated. And so why do they hate us? According to Bush, it's not because of what he said.
No, what America does, it's what we stand for. Well, interestingly enough, the WikiLeaks comes up with some good stuff, and one of the caches of materials that WikiLeaks has posted are all the diplomatic cables around the Gaza Flotilla 2010. So it's been fascinating to see how much energy was used by the U.S. government on the 2010 and then on the 2011 flotilla. There are reams and reams of cables that are going from Washington to all of the U.S. embassies around the Mediterranean. Try to find out as much as you can about what ship these Americans are going to be on, who are the Americans, and actually they knew because we publicized who was going to be on it. But it was very, very interesting to read all of this stuff about, and that's in another way, that's forcing our own government to deal with some of these things, and they don't like dealing with it, but tough noogies, we're going to keep doing these things, even though our government doesn't like it and doesn't help us at all, doesn't protect us, doesn't go to complain to the Israeli government about what the treatment that its own citizens has gotten from Israel. George, or let's see, Carol hasn't asked one, and then George.
I was just remembering the Secretary of State Hillary's comment that if they get killed, it's their own fault. That was the government's.
If we get killed, it's our own fault, according to Hillary Clinton. Yeah. George?
Reminds us of Rachel Corrie. But I'd just like to, I think there is, I appreciate you bringing up the boycott, and that is something that we can actually get behind and do. But I think the response that you encountered on the flotilla, Freedom Flotilla, which was, crazy, and what the Palestinians have suffered, especially in Gaza, an Israeli, if you can call it a response, which was crazy, off the charts. I'd like to say ballistic, I'm not sure. I'm mixing our metaphors, but and I think there's a relation of that to the way Israel has responded to the threat of sanctions, divestment, and boycott. In reality, that has hardly touched Israel so far. But Israel has something that they call Hasbara, which is their propaganda machine. And it is a propaganda machine that, I mean, is at the very top of the ladder. I mean, they put so much into propaganda. They also have a term, I'm sorry, the Hebrew word slips my mind right now, but it basically means going ballistic. And this is an old strategy of Israeli response. That if somebody says something you don't like, you go nuts. And an example of that is any criticism of Israel, no matter how well grounded in human rights law, international law, the response is anti-Semitism. They're trying to kill us all. And we see that occurring now with the BDS attempts. They're yelling so loud. I mean, eventually it could become something. But this is a standard response of Israel to yell and scream as if the sky is falling down and we're picking on Israelis, poor Israel, you know, this type of thing. So I'm totally in agreement with you. I'd love to see boycott and sanctions and divestment really start to bring down the economic house of Israel. But unfortunately, we have a very long way to go. And let's not believe the complaints that are being issued by various Israeli representatives. It's not hurting yet nearly as much as we'd like it to.
I read that there's some kind of a bill in Congress that would allow Israeli-made products made in the occupied territories to be labeled made in Israel. And I wondered what you know about that, how far it's gotten, how likely it is to pass.
Yeah, I think I've heard that one too.
So far, it has very few sponsors, but it has been introduced.
Isn't it kind of de facto happening anyway, though? I think it happens. It's just it happened. I mean, I think those things are labeled Israeli anyway.
But that's contrary to
law,
U.S. law.
But I think that is how the labeling happens.
Well, with the TPP for Asia and the Pacific, I mean, now labeling on a lot of products is just gone. You don't know where it's supposed to come from, so that will be part of it. And I'll just mention one other thing on what George said, this kind of going ballistic on anything that criticizes the state of Israel. Well, not only do they have this massive propaganda machine, but they also hire young kids to troll on the internet. And anytime they see something that is critical of the state of Israel, whether it's on Facebook or whether, you know, wherever it is, all of a sudden there will be stuff that will be launched. And it's a very orchestrated way to attack, as you mentioned, anything that's critical of the state of Israel. So I'm kind of surprised we didn't get anything on this meeting, or did we?
I think university students get $2,000, equivalent U.S. $2,000 to participate in hospital campaigns.
They do what now?
I think Israeli students can get paid $2,000 per term to contribute to hospital.
Is that right? Wow.
I want to ask about the lawsuit. Is the law of war being used? Is the law of war being used in the lawsuit, or is it some other kind of legal system?
I think in the International Criminal Court, that was going to be the theory, that somehow there was a part of a violation of the law of war. I may be mistaken on that, though, but it was something that was like, when we heard how they were going to the terminology of it, it was like, oh, well, good luck on that one. I'm glad you're trying it. But I'd have to really investigate that.
Yeah, so, because it would be weird if they kind of put it in terms of was the response proportionate or disproportionate. Mm-hmm. So that could be one way of looking at it versus, let's say, that actually stopping you in any way was illegal. Mm-hmm. That the blockade is illegal, so that was just an act of piracy or something. So I was just wondering what kind of categories are they?
Legal argument it is. I'll have to dig into that one because I really don't know. The ICC one was just not one that has really been formed yet, if I understand it right.
When you were attacked, you were actually in international waters, right? You were not. I think it was.
Right, we were 70 miles in international law.
Violation of international law, point blank.
And that's been acknowledged even by the Israelis. They acknowledged it, that. But the U.S. government, I wouldn't say attacks, or that's not the terminology the U.S. government uses. It does stop vessels at sea whenever it wants to, wherever it wants to. And I think from the Israelis said, hey, good precedent. The U.S. is doing that all over the world for whatever reason it is that they give. We'll just do it to these guys and just say to the U.S. government, well, we're following your...
But couldn't nationals of other countries who don't use these kinds of practices sue or do something, bring some kind of a suit? I don't know where.
Well, and part of this is finding people who will bring the suits for you. And like I said, it's taken us 5 years to get suits on behalf of the U.S. flagged vessel to be put in U.S. courts. As much as lawyers say they do pro bono stuff, a lot of them don't want to touch this issue. And so it's always tough. Always tough. We have enough trouble trying to get the stupid boats, get money for that, and then, and let's raise another $500,000 for our legal fees. Yeah, it's like,
How much does one of these ventures cost?
Well, it depends on how big the boats are. The U.S. boat to Gaza, which was a 100-foot boat, 33 meters, big boat, and we could take passengers, 50 passengers and 8 crew on that thing. That ended up costing about, to buy the boat, have it renovated, get all the supplies, that was around $400,000. But with the ones that we're going to work on now, because the boat market is in our favor now. There are a lot of boats in Turkey, and there aren't many boats left in Turkey. They're all heading for Greece with refugees on them. But there are boats in other parts of the Mediterranean that we can get cheaper, and they will not be as big as that 100-foot boat. The women's boat to Gaza will be a much smaller thing. I would say probably if we have a boat big enough for 15 passengers and 5 crew, that's probably what it's going to be. So we'll probably have room for 1 passenger for each of the national campaigns, and we're going to spread that out. Our U.S. campaign will nominate 6 people, and we get nominations. The next thing, if you sign up on our little list, we'll be sending you an email saying we want you to nominate people, and that would provide publicity. So big names are helpful, but people that are from the artist community, we know a politician that's brave enough to do this. Cynthia McKinney, former U.S. Congresswoman, is the only politician from the United States that's ever been on one of these. And yet from Europe, we get all sorts of parliamentarians, from France, from Spain, from the UK, from Ireland, from Turkey. We had the former president of Tunisia on this last flotilla. But this is toxic stuff for American politicians. Palestinian supporters, Palestinians, we're looking for nominees. We'll submit 6 nominees to the International Delegation Committee, and then they will look at all the nominees from all of the countries and then try to balance out occupations, backgrounds, and things, and then make the final selection. Well, I want to thank you all so much for the opportunity to share support for the
Thank you so much.
And if I can get that list back with your names on it so I can get what information to you.
U.S. Israel, you can't hide.
Israel is planning to demolish up to 17,000 Arab buildings in the West Bank. That's according to a UN report. Human rights groups are accusing Israeli authorities of forcing Palestinians off their land to allow expansion for Jewish settlements. RT's Paula Sleer reports from Silwan, an area in Jerusalem which has become a flashpoint in the standoff between Arabs and Jews.
Just steps away from the old city of Jerusalem, a bitter war over land is playing out. The battleground, Silwan, a neighborhood where Arabs outnumber Jews 100 to 1. But Jewish activists with money are trying to change that and are buying up as many properties as they can.
When they take a home, they close the area around the home. They have guards and police that use guns. They drive around with an armored vehicle. We don't interact with them.
Fahi Abu Diab has lived here his whole life. He fears that by changing the numbers on the ground, Palestinian neighborhoods will eventually become Jewish, and those Arabs who don't want to leave will be driven out. Abu Naba Abdallah's family has lived in this house since 1948. Behind him lives a Jewish family, but the neighbors could be living in different countries for the number of times they've spoken to each other.
This house is my identity. I was born here. My father brought me here the day I was born. The Jews tried to buy my house, but I won't sell it. I won't sell my house even if they pay me $10 million, which they did offer me 12 years ago.
Abdullah has appealed to the courts, but says it made no difference. He and his Arab neighbors have signed petitions, held demonstrations, and appealed for international assistance. They accuse the Israeli government of directly and indirectly helping Jews buy houses.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly said he has no intention of telling Jews they cannot buy apartments in Arab neighborhoods. He says it's private property, and both Jew and Arab have the right to buy wherever they want.
But the reality is not so black and white. Not a single new Arab neighborhood has been built in Jerusalem in the last 48 years. Spearheading the effort to make the city more Jewish is this man, who says his life mission is to help more Jews live in Jerusalem. He claims most of these houses were at one time Jewish.
Jews are not allowed to enter to 10 neighborhoods in Jerusalem by a government decision, Israeli government decision. Jews are not allowed to build in East Jerusalem just because one thing, they are Jews. This is apartheid.
Abu Naba Abdallah might insist he's going nowhere, but he's watching more and more of his neighbors packing up. An attractive offer of money to a family struggling to survive in a place that increasingly doesn't want them might not seem such a bad offer after all. Paula Sleer, RT, Silwan, East Jerusalem.
Has to sign up. Well, let's see what the sign says here. It says, Israel, 65 years of slaughter and media lies.
We will not go down in the night without a fight. You can burn up our mosques and our homes and our schools, but our spirit will never die. We will not go down Gaza tonight. Women and children alike, murdered and massacred night after night, while the so-called leaders of countries afar debated on who's wrong or right.
Stop funding Israel! Stop funding genocide!
Stop U.S. Israeli genocide in Gaza! That's why we're here, folks. Stop the murder of the Palestinian people.
Stop funding Israel! Stop funding genocide! 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 Stop funding genocide! Stop funding Israel! Stop funding genocide! Stop funding...
Palestinian children are imprisoned and tortured by Israel with
U.S. dollars. Stop U.S. dollars for violent terror.
Stop funding Israel! Stop funding genocide! Stop funding Israel! Stop funding genocide! Stop funding Israel! Stop funding genocide! Stop funding Israel! Stop funding genocide!
570 Palestinians dead, 3,350 Palestinians wounded, 100,000 plus Palestinian refugees, end U.S. military support of genocide, end the occupation, U.S. military imperialism, the genocide.